Hey there everybody, it's McQUELINKS. I'm back with another video. This is number 32 in my ongoing series of question and answer videos. I will put a link to the complete playlist if you enjoy this vid. There are plenty more where it came from. Let's jump into the first question from Zach's Audio. Is there an art style that doesn't require shading? Well, the answer is yes. There are definitely loads of art styles that don't involve shading. I'm going to be doing pen and ink today with a dip pen. It's only the second one of these videos that I've done. And my goal is to have this drawing involve very little in the way of shading. It's going to be mainly linear. And the concept that I came up with here today is kind of a funny one. This soba noodle truck that is in the future with like mechanical limbs that allow it to move around through this desert-like dystopian landscape. I just thought it would be an interesting combination of the old and the new, and I put in, you can see some basic pencil lines here, but a lot of this I'm kind of just going to be making up on the fly, trying to be a little more spontaneous with this one. Anyway, I wanted to continue answering that question a little more insofar as encouraging people that there are so many different styles. And sometimes I feel young artists can get a little hung up on this idea of, I need to learn how to draw realistically. I need to be able to make super smooth lines. I need this, that, I'm a big believer in breaking through all those rules and saying, hey, look, there's so many different styles. No two artists have exactly the same goals. If you find that you're struggling to draw in a certain way, maybe set yourself a different target to draw in a more cartoony way. Explore different styles. We have so many styles to choose from compared to, I would say, in previous centuries. It really was, kind of like realistic drawing or nothing. And now we live in a time where there's just an infinite variety of styles, all of which can be excellent, provided you take them seriously and put in lots and lots of practice. Let's move on now to number 2 from Smiley Freak. Do you believe it is important or necessary to sign your own artwork? An interesting question. I'm pretty sure I've never answered this one before. I used to sign all my artwork, especially my cover art, back in the early days of when I first got published. And for whatever reason, I've kind of stopped doing that. Part of it is that if you have a big, fancy signature, it can call a lot of attention to itself and detract a little from the final image. A lot of my books have my name right there on the front in pretty big lettering, and so I think it's not really necessary to remind people that the cover illustration is by me. They can assume that everything in the whole book was by me, right? But certainly, if you look through the old master oil paintings, Monet and so forth, everybody signed their artwork back then. So it's, in a way, I hadn't really thought about it until now. Why did I stop signing the artwork? Maybe I should start again. Maybe at the end of this illustration I can sign my name. Certainly, I know a lot of people, and it seems to me especially young, as yet unpublished people, are very concerned about their artwork being stolen. And in these days with the internet, of course, it's easier than ever for someone to steal your work and pretend that they created it themselves. It's to me, it seems like Pandora's box has been opened there. A lot of people put watermarks on things and so forth to try to deter that, I suppose that. But I don't like having watermarks, sort of translucent lettering, across right the middle of my drawing. I just can't stand to do that, so I just let it go. Don't do watermarks, and I don't actually sign my name to things, not very often anyway. Let's move on now to a big one. This one I decided to quote the entire question from an unspoken legend. Any advice on writing the meaningful filler of sorts in a story? I have a ton of moments / plot points in the comic I am creating, even the beginning, middle, and end. However, right now they are like checkpoints with nothing much in between. Then, when I go to write, I realize I have no idea what to write to bridge these moments together. Great question there, and I must say, without critiquing the question too much, the use of the word filler is, sort of raises red flags there, and to give you the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to say maybe they didn't mean filler in the sense of just padding out the story, but more the kind of connective tissue between one scene and another. Now, when I write a story, I've come up with a kind of a goal for the main character that they're trying to pursue. And that kind of helps me streamline everything so that every scene is getting them one step closer to that goal. And basically, when one scene ends, it allows me to just move immediately to the next scene. Because I know what the purpose of each scene is. And this idea of each scene having a single purpose is not necessarily self-evident. Let me, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break from inking this. I'm going to show you my first issue of Brodys Ghost and explain how one scene leads to another. So here's Brodys Ghost. I just want to show you how everything in the story has a purpose. Like, we open up the story in Brodys' room, showing what a messy guy he is. This is all part of setting up his journey as a character. He's very messy at the beginning, and he has somewhere to go from here, later on in the story. Then we start establishing the world. I want the people reading the story to have a very strong sense of this location, this sort of decaying, futuristic place. We keep moving on until we begin the first big scene of the story, and the purpose of the scene is to have Brody meet the ghost. And that's all I really need to achieve. And I tried to come up with my best way of making it dramatic, but everything is streamlined and bringing us towards this first meeting face to face. And I want to get to this point where Brody is seeing the ghost for the first time. He's completely freaked out. And that's basically all I need to do with this scene. We give a little hint of her character, but very quickly she becomes fed up with his speechlessness and says, well, I got to get out of here. You're not ready. You can't handle this. And so she goes away. And this is where we reach the end of the scene. Now, you talk about the connective tissue. How do I get from one scene to the next? Well, in my case, I just turn the page and boom, we're in the next scene. Now, I use narration, Brody's narration, to ease the shock of that sudden jump cut. But I would say you don't even really need it. You don't necessarily have to have narration. You could just move to this next scene and throw the reader in, and they would understand, okay, this is Brody, this must be his friend. Anyway, it's a huge topic, this idea of the sort of connective tissue between one scene and another and creating transitions. I definitely want to cover it in greater length in a future video. But for now, let me just thank An Unspoken Legend for raising this very important topic. And rest assured, I will be back with a video covering that one real soon. But let's move on to the next question. So here it is, number 4. From Terror of Death Night. What are your thoughts on web comics? I've never made a web comic myself, but I think it's a marvelous way of getting your work out there. I would say, those of you who live in the modern world of the internet, you have an opportunity that people like me didn't have back in the 90s or when I first started. The internet was just getting going, and this idea of web comics was really just starting out. Having your own webcomic out there, especially if you can build up an audience, is, I almost turned it into Zoba. Sorry, Mark. This is where the 1010 goes. Anyway, having a webcomic would be a great way of getting your work out there. If you can build up an audience, that's the tricky thing, of course. I unfortunately can't give a whole lot of advice on that, although certainly, the YouTube channel has proven a great way for me of getting awareness of my books out there. You could do the same thing, trying to build awareness of your webcomic. I think it's a marvelous way of getting started, and I think it's really changed the rules. In the old days it was all about getting past the gatekeepers and finding some publisher that was interested in your work. Now you can kind of be your own publisher now. with these webcomics, and I would say if you've got a great idea for a story, I'd say go ahead, get it started. I can't tell you which are the best websites to do it on, but I'd say maybe DeviantArt would be a decent place to start. And I'm all for it. I've never done one myself, just because somewhere along the line I got into the mindset of getting book deals with real publishers, and that just takes up all my time. And to create a decent webcomic, I would have to carve out so much time that I don't have right now. But those of you who haven't, or just starting out, I think it's a wonderful thing, and I would encourage you to consider it. Let's move on now to number 5. From Robert McDougall, or McDougall. Are you fluent in speaking Japanese, and how often do you go to Japan? Well, the word fluent is, that's a tall order. I would not say that I'm fluent, but just to give the full background, I lived in Japan for 2 years back when I was in my 20s, teaching English at a small school in the north of Japan. Then later on came back to America, where I met my now wife, and she is Japanese, and so at that point I married into a Japanese family, and as you can imagine, that involved learning much more Japanese. Once you have in my case, a Japanese wife, you're not so much like, it's not like I'm sitting around practicing my Japanese with her, but she speaks to me in Japanese, and so I'm hearing Japanese all day long. It certainly helps a lot with comprehension. Now, in terms of my fluency, I have not actually spoken Japanese in a YouTube video for quite a while. I did one years ago. I think it was a Q&A video. And so I guess I could try to speak a little right now, for those of you who wonder. 僕のね、日本語は完璧な日本語じゃないけど、まあ、頑張ってるよね。That's my way of speaking Japanese. What I'm into is trying to get the pronunciation, the kind of rhythm of the language, because every language has its own rhythm, and I enjoy the kind of, not just the words, but the sort of sounds that people make in between, one word and the next. Like, for example, if a Japanese person were to say, that is incorrect, they might say, まあ、それは違う. And you can even hear me sort of doing a little, それは違うでしょ. There's this kind of casual, raspy way of talking that some Japanese men have. That's the kind of thing that I'm into, is trying to replicate that sound. I don't want to be one of these guys who's like, 私は America-jin, where it just sounds really fake. And I've never been so good at the grammar, and especially when I try to construct a really long sentence in Japanese, it completely falls apart. But I do my best. Because I have never had any formal study. I never took an actual, Japanese class in college. But the other part of that question was, how often do you go to Japan? I'd say about once every 2 years. Sometimes if I'm lucky, I get to go 2 years consecutively. Let's move on to number 6, from Sophia Grace. What are some common and major struggles you faced and still face when drawing? For me, it's always anatomy. Still, human anatomy is still, and will probably always be a struggle for me. I feel like the characters, the way I draw them, always look a little stiff. I guess I've improved over the years, but I'm never as good as I would like to be when it comes to issues of anatomy, and that probably means that I need to break out the books and study the anatomy more closely. Maybe I can make a series of videos that's like, Crilley goes back to school, in terms of trying to come to grips with some of these anatomical issues that I have. Let's move on now to number 7, from McKenna Donahue. What keeps you motivated to finish a book? I think the big thing with being motivated, in my case, is to find a story that you are very eager to tell. And in my situation, I find that I will see pretty early on if I'm not energized about the story that I've started working on, and a few pages in, I just start to lose my energy for it. At which case you have to say, well, is this the one? Is this the project? Maybe I should try another project and see if that one grabs me more. And so I would say that that initial decision of choosing which idea am I going to do. You know, I've got, for example, I came up with a story idea years ago that involved kind of classic Halloween type characters. And I worked it all out, and I still sort of have it as a plot, beginning, middle, and end. But I don't have the energy to get into it. I sort of lost interest in my own concept, and I just know not to start that one because I will lose motivation as I go into it. So I think part of the key is to recognize a false start, and then maybe start fresh with some other idea and see if that's the one that you will be able to keep going on. That's kind of my best advice on that subject. I know easier said than done. But maybe the reason that you're having trouble remaining motivated means that the story itself is not interesting enough to you. And rather than fight that, maybe acknowledge it and say, okay, I need to start with another story that interests me more. And of course, I do this professionally, so there's the motivation of the deadline, the paycheck, and feeding my family. That's, you know, the best kind of motivation in a way. You don't goof around when you've got an actual book contract. Let's move on now to number 8. What did your art look like before you studied anime? This one from Barbara Grace, and I thought I'd go ahead and grab, the last project I did before I switched to a manga style was a series called Billy Click. Hang on, I'll go ahead and grab a book to show you. So this is Billy Click, Rogmasher Rampage, the second book in what proved to be a 2-book series. And this was the style, these very sort of angular features. I was trying to reinvent myself as an artist, and I don't know if I really succeeded. But you can see it was, talk about shading. This one involved an awful lot of shading. That was the style that I was using right before I switched to trying to teach myself how to draw in a manga style for Miki Falls. Those of you who are curious, and there's a whole bunch of projects before this that had nothing to do with anime, but I thought I'd show the one that immediately preceded my first manga style project. Now we can move on to number 9 from Rob Seeb. Mark, if you can't have both, is it better to pursue your passion or a career that you are good at and pays well? Well, boy, that's a huge question there, and of course it begins with if you can't have both. I'll come back to that in a second, but I'd say, but if you can't have both, I always say go for the thing you're passionate about no matter what. You don't want to go to your grave having never pursued your dream. But, of course, the answer is you can have both, especially if you are still young and you're not married and you don't have kids, depending on you. You have a chance to chase your dream without consequence to anyone but yourself. And I always say, well, yeah, at least try. How do you know if you can succeed in the world of art or writing or music or whatever it is if you don't even try? So I would say, especially young people out there who do not yet have dependents, I would encourage you, chase that dream. Try to, give it a shot, especially in your 20s. Don't let people tell you, oh, you really should become an accountant because it's a much more stable income or whatever. You don't want to get stuck in a job that you hate. Not to say that you would necessarily hate that particular job. It's just an example. I got to be on the side of the dreamers. But, even for those of you who are married and have kids and are maybe doing a job that you're not so crazy about, maybe you can carve out a little spare time in the evenings or weekends to continue chasing your dream. I don't believe that they are mutually exclusive. I think it's sort of a false choice in a way. I think you can do both of them to some degree. Don't give up on your dreams just to, make sure you can pay the bills. Here we are with number 10 from Kimani Coates. If you had to choose between only being able to draw realistically of real-life things or only being able to draw manga/cartoon style of anything, which would you choose? Marvelous question there. I think actually I probably would choose cartoony styles. In my life, the vast majority of my books have been done in a cartoony style. Of course, you see me sometimes pulling out the realism challenge, and I'm very glad that I was able to do that book that has highly realistic illustrations. It's nice to be able to do realism when I need to, but I think in my personal case, the ability to do cartooning has been the more significant thing. So yeah, again, this is one of these Sophie's choices. Which will you choose between these two things? I guess I would have to go for cartoony styles. Well, I think it's time for me to kick it into time-lapse a little to get a little further along with this part of the drawing, and then we will be back with the ever-popular lightning round question. Well, I think I'm far enough along with this drawing that we can go ahead and move into the final questions. Before I do, though, I want to give credit to Ian McQUE. I hope I'm saying his name right. I follow him. He's a very, very talented illustrator. I follow him on Twitter, and this whole drawing that I'm doing is heavily, heavily influenced by his style, almost kind of a ripoff, really. Sad to say, but I did highly admire his pen and ink work. I don't do a lot of pen and ink work, and so, without copying any particular drawing, I thought, let's see if I can do a little, what I call a style play, as I said in my latest book, Manga Art. It's almost like cosplay, except you're trying on the style of another artist. Ian McQUE. I'll put a link to his Twitter feed and to his website in the description of this video. By all means, check it out. You're going to fall in love with his work. Let's go ahead now and move into the lightning round. Question number 1 from Samantha M. Snowden. Have you ever going to any conventions this year? As a matter of fact, I am going to be going to Wizard World Chicago, and I will be there on Sunday, August 27th. I think also the previous day, Saturday, the 26th. I will link also to their website. If you are in the Chicago area, by all means, come on out, and I'd love to meet you face to face. Let's move on to number 2 from McQUE Lore. Are you ever going to change your YouTube profile picture? No, I'm not. I'm one of these boring guys who settled on that picture years ago, and I ain't changing now. So get off my lawn! Hey, wait a minute, I sounded like old man time-lapse there. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3. Is a Brodys Ghost sequel possible? Yes, it definitely is possible. In fact, I wrote it in such a way that it could be possible. I envisioned a storyline in which, the city is taken over by the mob. And I thought really Brodys' ultimate goal should be to take down the kingpins of the mob and sort of liberate this city. But who knows if that will ever happen. I am busy with an awful lot of other projects, and I am working on a graphic novel idea. Can't say anything more about it. I haven't even found a publisher for it yet, but there are more comics in my future. Let's move on to number 4 from Jonathan Bananal. Pineapple on pizza, a yes or no? Yes, absolutely. Why not put pineapple on pizza? But I think you will find that there are always a few slices left at the end of the party. Let's move on to Legendary Brick. Who's your favorite YouTuber? What? You're going to make me choose my favorite YouTuber? I got to say Evan Burse from Cartoon Block. We go way back, and I even got to hang out with him in L.A. not too long ago. A very close second, though, would be Sophie Chan, who I've known and collaborated with on 2 different occasions. Check out her work and her book, Ocean of Secrets, if you haven't seen it yet. And, of course, Bailey J. and Jazza, 2 big favorites of mine. Who knows, maybe the 3 of us can do another collab at some point like we did last year. Let's move on to number 6 from Dark Chi Sheep. Hard to pronounce some of these. Can you please read this question backwards? Okay, here we go. Drakab noisiok sehet deir esalp uoinak. Whew. That was a tough one. Let's move on to number 7 here from Monica Rios. If you were in the Studio Ghibli world with Totoro, what's the first thing you guys would do together? Take a ride on the cat bus, of course. Absolutely the first thing you have to do. And a shout out there to Monica. She's been watching these videos for many years, and I'm very grateful to her for sticking with me for so long, and to any of the rest of you who continue to watch these videos year after year. Let's move on to number 8. On a scale from 0 to 10, how much do you like bacon? I'm going to say 7 or so, but let me tell you, the smell of bacon, I'm going to give that a 10. Nothing smells better than frying bacon. Let's move on to number 9 from It's Tyrone. How large is your forehead? Hang on, I'm going to go measure. All right, turns out it is 3 1/4 inches tall by 7 1/2 inches wide. It's huge. If any of you saw me walking down the street, you'd be like, dude, look at the massive dome on that guy. Sorry, I had to break out the surfer dude there. Finally, number 10. Miki, Brody, Talia, Akiko, and David are in a war against the trusty black Prismacolor, the beloved white gouache, and the blushies. What side are you on? That from Annalias Studios. Oh, you asking these impossible questions of me. Sadly, I'm going to have to say all of my characters are going to have to lose that battle. For the good of future generations, I don't want to deprive them of the glory of the white gouache and the, what else was it? Well, of course, the blushies. And the trusty black Prismacolor. We cannot be so selfish as to let those guys lose the battle. That brings us to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Certainly not the last of my Q&A videos, and I won't pull out the books, but many thanks to anyone who supports me by getting my books. The links are in the description of this video. But I think it's time for me to lay down this dip pen. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another one real soon.